Haunted or hallucinating? 5 stories you won't believe. What happens when the shadow you see in the corner of your eye isn't just a trick of the light? What if the voice you hear when you're all alone isn't just the house settling? Our minds are powerful things, capable of creating entire realities. But sometimes, reality itself is what's hard to believe. There's a razor-thin line between a paranormal experience and a psychological one. On one side, you have psychosis, a condition where the mind creates its own reality. On the other, you have centuries of stories from every culture on Earth about encounters with the paranormal. Tonight, we're exploring that terrifying gray area. We have 5 stories about people who found themselves trapped in that space, forced to ask a terrifying question: is my house haunted, or is my mind? Story 1. The Nurse in the Asylum. When a young woman inherited a huge historic building from her grandfather, she wasn't sure what to do. It was, after all, a former asylum, but he had lovingly restored it into a beautiful home, and compared to her cramped apartment, it was a palace. So she decided to move in. Life was quiet at first, but the woman had her own history, a recent diagnosis of schizophrenia. Until then, her symptoms had been managed, and she'd never actually seen things that weren't there. That's what made the first sighting so jarring. Late one night, walking down one of the long, empty hallways, she saw her, a woman in an old-fashioned white nurse's uniform, like a figure stepping out of a black and white photo. The woman just stood there, a silent, eerie presence in the massive building. Was this a new symptom? Or was it something else? Something connected to the building's dark past? She ran back to her room, heart pounding in her chest. A few days later, it happened again. This time, the nurse turned and stared right at her, a wicked smile slowly spreading across her pale face. In her hand, she was holding a shiny silver medical instrument. Then she started walking forward. The woman fled the home and never went back. To this day, she doesn't know if she was being stalked by a ghost from the asylum's tormented past, or by a hallucination created by her own mind. Story 2. The Man in the Static. Mark was a college kid living in a cheap, rundown apartment. The wiring was terrible, the lights flickered, and his TV would often dissolve into a screen full of static for no reason. He didn't think much of it until the faces started appearing. At first, it was just a flicker in the static, the shape of an eye, the line of a mouth. He figured it was just his brain trying to see patterns where there were none. But the images got clearer, more persistent. It was always the same man, gaunt with hollow eyes that held a look of deep sadness. Around the same time, Mark's life started falling apart. He stopped seeing his friends, his grades dropped, and he was filled with a constant gnawing paranoia. He felt like he was always being watched. He'd hear faint whispers like a radio playing in another room, but he could never quite make out the words. The man on the television became his only companion. One night, the whispers grew louder, clearer, and they seemed to be coming from the TV. The man's face was there, his mouth moving in time with the sound. He was telling Mark things, secrets about the universe, warnings about the people he trusted. Mark's family eventually got him hospitalized. With treatment, the whispers stopped, and the man on the screen faded back into random static. Was it a spirit using the faulty wiring to communicate? Or was it Mark's own mind, projecting its fears onto the screen? For Mark, the haunting was terrifyingly real, because it came from inside. Story 3. The Playmate in the Woods. When the Miller family moved into their new home, it seemed absolutely perfect. It was a charming house right next to a dense, ancient forest. Their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was thrilled. She loved playing outside, and she quickly made a new friend she'd spend hours with near the edge of the woods. Her parents, Sarah and Tom, were just happy she was happy. They never actually saw this new friend, of course. Lily said her name was Alara, and that she lived in the trees. She described her as having long, dark hair and wearing a simple, old-fashioned white dress. Sarah just figured it was a normal imaginary friend. But then, things got weird. Lily started talking in a way that wasn't her own, using words and phrases a 7-year-old shouldn't know. She would talk about memories from 100 years ago. One evening, Lily came inside, clearly upset. "Alara is sad," she said. "Her family lost her in the woods. They never found her." A cold dread washed over Sarah. Was her daughter really talking to the ghost of a lost child, or was this something else? Lily was becoming more and more withdrawn, spending her days whispering to the trees. The breaking point came when Sarah found Lily standing at the very edge of the forest, her hand outstretched as if someone was holding it. Lily was crying, saying Alara wanted her to come into the woods so she wouldn't be alone anymore. Sarah snatched her daughter back. They moved out a month later. Sarah will never know if she saved her daughter from a lonely spirit or from the first signs of a serious mental illness. Story 4. The Poltergeist of Culver City. In 1974, a woman named Doris Bither called a team of parapsychology researchers at UCLA. She was desperate. She claimed that she and her children were being physically terrorized by invisible entities in their Culver City home. What they documented became one of the most famous and debated paranormal cases ever, even inspiring the horror film The Entity. For weeks, investigators, led by Dr. Barry Taff, saw things they couldn't explain. Objects flew off shelves, strange lights appeared out of nowhere, and the family members had bruises and scratches they said came from unseen attackers. To the researchers, it looked like a violent poltergeist haunting. But there was another side to the story. Doris Bither had suffered a life of horrific trauma and abuse, and the family was living under extreme stress. Psychologically, these are massive red flags. Trauma and stress can act as triggers for severe psychological breaks. Skeptics have since argued that the whole thing was a mix of a deeply distressed family, investigators who wanted to believe, and sloppy research. Was Doris attracting paranormal activity, as one investigator thought? Or were the events a shared delusion, born from a life of hardship? The case of the Culver City haunting is a perfect storm, leaving everyone to wonder if the haunting was in the house or in the minds of the family living there. Story 5. The Doppelganger on the Stairs. For months, Alex had been living with a feeling of creeping dread. It started after a bad car accident that left him with a concussion and a deep sense of unease. He started seeing things, shadows that darted away when he turned his head, figures at the very edge of his vision. One evening, he was walking up the stairs to his apartment when he saw it. Standing on the landing above him was himself. A perfect copy, wearing the same clothes, with the same exhausted look on its face. The doppelganger just stood there, silent and still. Alex, terrified, turned and ran, spending the night at a friend's place. This was the climax of weeks of strange events. He'd hear his own voice calling his name from empty rooms. He'd find things moved around his apartment. He was becoming paranoid and couldn't sleep, feeling like he was being followed by his own reflection. The idea of a doppelganger is an ancient paranormal belief, often seen as a terrifying omen. But there's actually a psychiatric term for it: hiatoscopy. It's a rare delusion where a person's brain essentially loses track of its own location, causing them to see a second version of themselves. Alex eventually got help and was diagnosed with a brief reactive psychosis, triggered by the trauma from his accident. With treatment, the vision stopped. But the memory of seeing himself on the stairs remains. Was it a paranormal twin brought on by trauma? Or was it his own mind showing him a terrifying reflection of its own breaking point? Conclusion. So where does the truth lie in these stories? A clinician might point to psychosis, trauma, or a simple trick of the brain. But for the people who lived through these events, the experiences were profoundly real. Sometimes a paranormal explanation is the only one that can make sense of the terror. These aren't just ghost stories. They're stories about the incredible and often frightening mystery of the human mind itself. They remind us that the line between a haunting and a hallucination might not be a line at all, but a space we're only just beginning to understand. What do you think? Were these genuine paranormal encounters or tragic episodes of psychological distress? Let us know your take in the comments below. And if you have a story that blurs the line, we want to hear it. If you want to explore more strange, dark, and mysterious stories, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching.